Hey there, interwebs, and welcome back to Russell's Guide to Monsters. Or rather, welcome to what got cut out of Russell's Guide to Monsters, episode 20. While working on the script for it, I realized that I had quite a lot to say about the work of Ray Harryhausen, so I excised most of it to make this bonus episode. Let's start by talking about skeletons. Not just because I love skeletons, but because they also seem to be a favorite of the animator, being the only Harryhausen creations to appear in more than one of his films. One served as the boss fight, in lieu of a better term, in the climax of the seventh voyage of Sinbad. Sakura may have been the big bad, but this Skelly is the one to beat for our hero to escape to safety, and it doesn't look happy about this fact. Normally I'd complain about a skull with a permanent angry face, but in this case I don't care. This is a fantasy film, and it looks fantastic. Another, less irascible, skeleton would have been the protagonist of Skin and Bones, a story about a man who is invisible except for his skeleton, based on a novel by Thorne Smith. Although this project went unrealized due to a lack of investors, a skeleton does make a cameo in First Men in the Moon. With all that out of the way, it's impossible to talk about Ray Harryhausen and skeletons without focusing on the Children of the Hydra's Teeth from Jason and the Argonauts. Which is ironic because originally they weren't supposed to be skeletons. Early drafts called for these creatures to be rotting corpses, but nice clean skeletons were deemed to be more censor-friendly. The changes were made, and the result would be one of the most iconic scenes not just in an animator's career, but in film history. Even if you've never seen this movie, you know this scene, and personally, it scared the shit out of me as a kid. It's a small miracle I became the bone collector I am today. That being said, skeletons are arguably still a category of creature, like aliens or dinosaurs, both of which also feature in 3 Harryhausen films, 4 if you count the fictional Rhedosaurus. If there is a single creature which can compete with the skeleton fight at the end of Jason as the zenith of Harryhausen's career, it has to be Medusa from his swan song, Clash of the Titans. Her appearance in that film was so impressive it redefined how we pictured the Gorgon, and fantasy art is still feeling its effects to this day. What do I mean by that? Many, if not most, modern depictions of Medusa give her a serpentine lower body, but I'm not aware of any which predate 1981. Prior to Clash of the Titans, Medusa was almost always a biped, or rarely a centaur. This semi-serpentine morphology was actually inspired by the Nagas of Indian mythology, which also influenced the transformation scene of Sati the Handmaiden in the seventh voyage of Sinbad. Ray Harryhausen's impact on classical mythology in the modern popular consciousness doesn't end at Medusa's tail, either. Due to his work on Jason, many people now believe it was a hydra rather than a dragon, which guarded the Golden Fleece, and countless modern depictions of a cyclops will include a single rhinoceros-like horn in the middle of its forehead, a design element originating with the aforementioned seventh voyage. This film wasn't Ray Harryhausen's first movie, but it was the first of the Sinbad trilogy, his first feature-length color film, and a turning point for the fantasy-adventure genre as a whole, and it comes out swinging, giving us a cyclops in less than 7 minutes. This creature first barreled onto the silver screen in 1958, and it was like nothing audiences had ever seen before. In 1957, movie cyclopses looked like this, but they never would again. Okay, that's not entirely true, but Harryhausen made an immeasurable impact on the standard image of the cyclops. Of course, not all of his creative takes on mythology would become so revolutionary. His second Cyclops comes from, appropriately enough, his second Sinbad movie, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and while the first was a combination of a Cyclops and a goat-legged satyr, this one was a Cyclops centaur thing. It battles a griffin in the climax of the film, and there's actually a nice bit of subtle mythological backstory to this conflict, although I don't know if it was intentional. Traditionally, griffins preyed on horses, which is why the hippogriff, being a hybrid of the two species, is an impossible animal. Furthermore, according to Aristeas via Herodotus, griffins furnished their nests with gold, which was stolen by their neighbors, who were cyclopses. Or, more accurately, they were a group of people known as the Arimaspi, who had a single eye in the center of their forehead, but this monocular morphology is likely based on some erroneous etymology. Herodotus believed the Scythian ethnonym Arimaspi was a combination of Arima and Spo, meaning one and eye, respectively, but it's more likely that it comes from the early Iranian Ariama and Aspa, meaning lover of horses. A Cyclopean centaur would neatly combine these two concepts. I don't know if Harryhausen was aware of this etymology, but I do know that he'd at least heard of the Arimaspi, because they get name-checked in the sequel, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, but their remains are obviously humanoid rather than centaurs. Clearly, Harryhausen took a mix-and-match approach to mythology, blending Gorgons with Nagas and Cyclopses with satyrs and centaurs, but why? Why go through the effort when the classical looks had already stood the test of time? To put it simply, he wasn't just a technician, he was an artist, and a good artist knows how to make the most of his medium. In the original Greek myths, Cyclopes were simply giant one-eyed men, and that's generally how pre-1958 films portrayed them, particularly for budgetary reasons. In Harryhausen's own words, however, I designed the Cyclops very carefully because I didn't want people to think it was a man in a suit. That's why he gave it goat legs, making it more like a traditional satyr or faun, remembering how his inspiration and mentor, Willis O'Brien, creator of King Kong, told him that some audience members mistook his stop-motion puppetry for a man in an ape suit. These days, most depictions of a cyclops omit these bestial legs in favor of something more humanoid, and we can assume this is generally for practical reasons when the monster is played by a human actor. Harryhausen made a similar decision regarding the morphology of the rock, which appears later in the film. In Persian mythology, it is simply a giant bird, but Harryhausen gave it a second head because otherwise, again in his own words, people would think it was just a bird put in the picture. That being said, less than a decade later, when Hammer Studios produced their dino fantasy film 1 Million Years BC, starring Raquel Welch in a fur bikini, Harryhausen was hired to do the creature effects, and it was his decision to use a live iguana and tarantula as the first monsters to mock encounters. This was partly done as a nod to the 1940 original, which is infamously a reptile snuff film, but also to lead audiences to believe that everything else which followed was likewise real. This was a decision he would later regret. Not only do the enlarged animals look hokey, but the creative choice may have backfired on him, as many viewers believed the colossal Archelon, which appears later on, was merely another live animal. Thus he succeeded in making a costly and labor-intensive special effect look like a much cheaper one. As an aside, it is likely this Archelon model and his rock bicapitate that make me think of Ray Harryhausen's work whenever I see the taxidermied two-headed tortoise in the Addams family living room. 15 years later, Clash of the Titans hit theaters, and the vulture in it which carries off Andromeda's spirit does genuinely look like just a big bird, but by this point in his career, Harryhausen had established a reputation which asserted such was not the case. Audiences knew what to expect from a Ray Harryhausen film, and so the animator had nothing left to prove. The vulture is not the bird which people remember from that movie, however. That dubious honor goes to Bubo the mechanical owl, and it is dubious because it often seems Bubo has as many detractors as he has fans, if not more. Personally, I have mixed feelings about Bubo. First of all, for context, Star Wars came out in 1977, and Clash came out in 1981. There's no way that Bubo, the hero's rotund robot buddy who communicates entirely in incomprehensible mechanical chirps and physical comedy, wasn't meant to evoke R2-D2, but here's the thing. I like R2-D2. The little astromech droid is in a permanent battle with Lieutenant Commander Data for the title of my favorite robot in fiction ever. Therefore, I should like things which evoke R2 as well, right? Well, let's just say I love my mother, but I'd be less favorably disposed towards someone wearing my mother's skin in a transparent attempt to imitate her. So yeah, Bubo is an R2 wannabe too, but he also helps fend off the Stygian witches, single-handedly rescues Pegasus from Calibos's goons, distracts the dreaded Kraken long enough for Perseus to arrive with the head of Medusa, and then saves the day by retrieving it after our hero drops it in the sea, all without ever feeling OP. Is he a blatant R2 ripoff? Sure, but at least he's a good R2 ripoff. Also, before this mechanical creation was aping R2-D2, another of Harryhausen's mechanical creations, the Minotaur of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, was played in long shots by Peter Mayhew, who also played Chewbacca that same year. This movie is sadly an entire film made of missed potential, from the beautiful location shots of Petra spoiled by subpar green screen work, to the emotional premise of a man being slowly stripped of his humanity being undercut by clunky expositional dialogue delivered with either no emotion or Zenobia's hammy histrionics, but nowhere is its wasted potential better embodied, literally, than in the Minotaur. Although its close-up shots used a stop-motion figure with superb animation as always, this didn't need to be the case. Because this creation is just a bull-headed humanoid, it was played by a tall suit actor in a cow hat in distant shots of the boat. If I were in charge of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, I would have done one of two things. Option A. Portray the Minotaur exclusively with a suit actor and use the budget to have another Harryhausen creature elsewhere. Or Option B. Change the design of the Minotaur to make it better suited for portrayal by a stop-motion figure, either by giving it extra arms like Kali in The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, or animal legs, which are common on modern depictions of Minotaurs, like the Cyclops from Seventh Voyage or Calibos from Clash, although it wasn't until years after I first saw the latter film that I realized Calibos has only one goat leg, the other remains humanoid. Thinking about it, Calibos is sort of the anti-Minotaur. The Minotaur was played by a stop-motion figure up close and a suit actor at a distance, whereas Calibos was played by a stop-motion figure in long shots but an actor in prosthetics up close. This is because the tragic anti-villain had to be able to emote. That, incidentally, is another way to justify a stop-motion Minotaur instead of an actor in a bull mask. The face could be made more expressive, like we see on Kasim. As an interesting aside, the actor who played Calibos was Neil McCarthy, who secured many roles as scary dudes due to his distinctive facial features, which were a result of acromegaly, the same condition which afflicted actors such as Rondo Hatton, Richard Kiel, and Andre the Giant. His makeup for Clash didn't so much hide this look as accentuate it. One of his more heroic roles was as Private Thomas in Zulu, directed by Cy Enfield, who had previously directed Harryhausen's Mysterious Island. Even looking past its lackluster design, the Minotaur also doesn't do much throughout the whole film. Spoilers ahead. Early in the film, the Minotaur kills Balsora and his men, but from a plot standpoint, there's no reason their deaths couldn't have been the work of one of Zenobia's spells, which could be accomplished with a much cheaper effect. Still, this does show off just how physically powerful the Minotaur is, foreshadowing an epic battle with our heroes at the climax of the film, right? Wrong. The Minotaur is destroyed before ever encountering the heroes when a huge block of stone falls down and crushes it. The Minotaur's death occurs because he was making a hole in the side of a temple to grant Zenobia entry, but, again, there's no reason this outcome couldn't be achieved with Zenobia's magic instead. She even throws a potion on the wall to weaken it for the Minotaur first. In truth, for most of the movie, the Minotaur is just an overly elaborate engine for Zenobia's ship. If she can use her magic to animate a Minotaurine automaton to row her boat, why can't she just, animate the boat? Again, if I were the one in charge, I'd replace Minotaur's stop-motion figure with Peter Mayhew in a suit, then use the budget savings to replace Zenobia's boat with a stop-motion plesiosaur or some kind of sea dragon for them to ride on instead. Then, when the time comes to kill Balsora and his men, we'd get some epic Elasmosaurus action as the monster rips them to pieces. Such a creation would be right up Harryhausen's alley, too. His name is heavily associated with dinosaur scenes these days, thanks in large part to his work on 1 million years BC in the Valley of Gwangi, and the man loved his creatures with serpentine anatomy. Look no further than Medusa from Clash of the Titans, the Hydra from Jason and the Argonauts, the giant cephalopods from Mysterious Island and It Came From Beneath the Sea, the Naga from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, or the unused Valley of Vipers sequence mooted for its sequel. It's quite possible he even intended to include a giant snake monster in this film, evidenced by the snake in the upper corner of the movie poster, but the idea was likely nixed by producer Charles Schneer, who was ophidiophobic. I'm also not a huge fan of Trog, either. This is essentially sacrilege for a Harryhausen fan, I know, so let me clarify that I don't love his design. His horn in particular bothers me. It almost feels like Harryhausen knew the Cyclops was one of his most loved and iconic character designs, and so slapped one of its most distinctive features on Trog to give him that same je ne sais quoi, like an artist copy-pasting from their back catalog. It worked on the Cyclops because, with the goat legs, it was clearly a chimeral monster, despite being humanoid in overall form. Trog is supposed to be a prehistoric human ancestor, however, making the horn feel wildly out of place. This simpler early design feels much more in line with what a caveman ought to look like, at least in my opinion. It also feels more ape-like, which reinforces the shared primal connection, or should I say primate connection, between him and Kasim, an element of this film which I love and which frustratingly goes largely unexplored. In the end, spoilers, Trog is killed by the giant saber-toothed cat of the title, inflicting emotional trauma on an entire generation of film-going children. It's sad, but it's also unnecessary. By this point, Prince Kasim has already had his humanity restored, so the only goal remaining is escape, and Trog's heroic sacrifice does nothing to bring the group closer to it because they stay to fight the cat anyway. I think a more satisfying climax would have been a battle between Trog and the Minotaur as the rest rushed to the fountain to restore Kasim. Trog is a primitive humanoid living in nature and wrapped in hides, while the Minotaur is an artificial humanoid constructed from advanced technology and made from polished metal. One is natural and out of the past, whereas the other is synthetic and futuristic, but both are part man and part beast, albeit in vastly different ways. Sinbad and company must rush to the fountain, incidentally, because there's a rule that Prince Kasim must be crowned before the passing of 7 moons, but I don't know why this must be so. Obviously, it's there to add a sense of urgency to the adventure, but we also learn the longer he remains baboon, the more like a wild animal he becomes, slowly losing his mental faculties. That's a good organic ticking clock element right there. The coronation caveat just feels like unnecessary red tape. Plus, I feel like if a kingdom's heir apparent were a baboon, they'd waive the official timeline due to extenuating circumstances. Prince has been cursed, delay of game. And speaking of complications that add nothing to the overall plot, when the group ventures to the extreme north, they encounter a gigantic walrus which the wizard Melanthius identifies as Walrus giganticus. While walruses do belong to their own genus, it isn't called walrus, it's Odobenus. I am amused by the idea, however, that in this setting walruses exist and there is a genus named after them, but they don't actually belong to it. It's like how the real-life species Puffinus puffinus isn't the puffin, it's the Manx shearwater. Anyhow, this dire walrus comes out of nowhere to attack our heroes, then goes right back there after they defend themselves. Its sudden appearance isn't a consequence of anything any of the characters did, nor does it contribute anything to the plot. Its only lasting impact is the deaths of 2 unnamed crew members. I suppose this helps to illustrate how perilous the journey is, but I'm not sure that was ever in doubt. Also, the phrase Walrus giganticus makes me think of Maximum Walrus, a nickname for this overstuffed taxidermy specimen. If you really want a dire walrus, however, look no further than Pontolus magnus, the 4-ton carnivorous walrus ancestor that was coeval with saber-toothed predators Barbarophilus and Thylacophilus, but not the saber-toothed tiger Smilodon. If it sounds like I'm just ragging on Eye of the Tiger, I am, to a degree, but know this. Ultimately, it's both the last and the least of the Sinbad trilogy, and it doesn't compare to Harryhausen's other mythology films, Jason and Clash, and yet, for reasons I'm still struggling to articulate, I think I'd rather watch it on any given day than any of the others, apart from perhaps Seventh Voyage. Yes, the plot is little more than a string of random events, but perhaps this lack of narrative cohesion and the resultant silliness lends the movie a more lighthearted tone, reminding the audience not to take things too seriously and just enjoy the set pieces for what they are. The arrival at Petra is still gorgeous, the fights with the giant walrus and saber-toothed tiger look amazing, and Melanthius versus the giant wasp is always entertaining, although not in the way the animator intended. It's just fun. In fact, this movie almost feels like someone's D&D adventure. Sinbad and Melanthius are the player's pirate and wizard PCs, and Princess Farah and Dione are played by their wags who are more interested in hanging out together than playing the game, explaining why they do so little. Meanwhile, Prince Kasim is an escort quest NPC, and the DM is having the time of his life, hamming it up as Zenobia. Her creation, Minotaur, was supposed to be the epic boss fight, but the DM rolled a nat 1 at an inopportune time and the robot died, forcing him to hastily introduce the saber-toothed cat as a last-minute replacement, which is why it isn't foreshadowed in any way prior to the Minotaur's destruction. Hell, even the gigantic walrus feels exactly like something off a random encounter table, given how little it has to do with the rest of the adventure, and due to the nature of the medium, the stop-motion models remind me of minifigs on a battle map, especially the ghouls at the start. Alright, that's just about everything I've got to say. All of the stuff that was cut out of my Guide to Monsters episode 20, and a fair bit more. Now, just to keep the algorithm happy, I'll end on a pair of top 5 lists. My top 5 Ray Harryhausen films, in no particular order. The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. It was his first color film and the one which made all that followed it possible, and left an indelible mark on fantasy cinema which can still be felt to this day. From the moment its Cyclops came charging onto the screen, nothing would ever be the same again. Clash of the Titans. The animator's final film, its good old-fashioned storytelling and timeless creations make it a worthy swan song. By zhuzhing up Greek mythology with Norse, Indian, and Shakespeare, Harryhausen took a mix-and-match approach to legends to create something unique. Calibos is a memorably sympathetic anti-villain, the Kraken is a terrifying kaiju of a monster, and no adventurer could hope for a more heroic mount than Pegasus, and Medusa is the cherry on top of it all. Jason and the Argonauts. Although regarded by many as Harryhausen's greatest film, and perhaps the only one able to rival Clash in its epic scope, I was disappointed as a child by its lack of a proper conclusion and definitive happy ending, but I was also terrified by the skeleton fight sequence, which is arguably the animator's most iconic scene. Talos is another great piece of both animation and storytelling, as well as a lasting piece of cinema history, and I haven't even mentioned Jason's fight against the Hydra. Suffice to say, I've come to appreciate it more with time. 20 Million Miles to Earth. Harryhausen's final black and white project may seem like a dark horse, but, even though I haven't mentioned it before now, I adore this film, and its ability to make the Venusian Emir more sympathetic than many human characters in other Monster on the Rampage films of the 50s earned a spot in my top 5. 1 Million Years BC. This movie has two things I never get tired of seeing, and Ray Harryhausen's dinosaur sequences give them a run for their money. As an armchair paleontologist, bat-winged pterosaurs and prehistoric anachronisms like cavemen alongside dinosaurs usually annoy me, but when they look this good, I just don't give a damn. As for Harryhausen's top 5 most iconic creations, number 1 is the pioneering Cyclops from Seventh Voyage, obviously. Next, we have the morphology redefining Medusa from Clash, and the lurching unlifelike Talos from Jason. Allowing for multiple entities as a single entry, I have to mention skeletons from Seventh Voyage and Jason, and ultimately dinosaurs, particularly theropods with Gwangi as the exemplar. Anyhow, that's everything, so, as always, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.